Good morning, everyone. Um, my name is Sana. I'll be chairing the panel discussion today, which is titled Engaging Young People with African History. Our first paper is presented by Mariam Haan and Nicola Pomery. Their paper is titled Story Explorers, Creating an Exhibition for Children and Families Using the British Library Collections. Mariam Haan is the lead curator of African collections at the British Library and a co-curator of Story Explorers in 2025. Within her role, she works to connect the African collections of the British Library to diaspora and academic communities of all ages. Previously, she served as the curator of African collections at the British Library and has conducted research in African cultures, literatures, economics, histories, and politics for 9 years, with a specialization in East Africa. Nicola Pomery is the Family and Community Programs Manager at the British Library, as well as co-curator of Story Explorers in 2025, and past exhibition Marvelous and Mischievous, Literature's Young Rebels in 2019. She was the education programmer at Parasol Unit for Contemporary Art, a visiting lecturer at the University for the Creative Arts, and at Camden Arts Centre, ran the Get the Message program for young people with severe and profound learning difficulty. What we'll do today is we'll hear from all the panelists and then do a Q&A at the end, and I'll introduce each panelist before their paper.
Cheers. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So you've just been very beautifully introduced. I'm Nicola Pomery, and this is Mariam Haan from the British Library. And we're both very delighted to be here today to talk about Story Explorers, a journey through imaginary. So it's on at the moment. Do come down if you can. It's on until next January 2026. And Story Explorers is all about introducing the British Library collections and stories to diverse families with children 2 to 9 years of age. Plus, midweek, we're very much excited about engaging with early years groups and school groups in Key Stage 1. AIM is very much about building on and amplifying learning, scale and impact of the Treasures pilot programme. And we ultimately want to create a permanent presence at the library for families. How have we done this? Well, we've been working with families to generate, test, and develop ideas for the gallery, ensuring that it connects with, communicates with, and inspires young people. Our family co-creation mythology. This new family experience has been created with families for families. And we've worked with participation specialists to test and generate ideas with families, fully developing the content through to the final offer. A wonderful family co-creation group have developed the overarching framework. They've selected collection items. They've inspired the content and ideas for play. They've created the worlds and the characters, designed the environment details, and tested the props and interactive experience. Why this approach? Maybe we don't need to ask that, but obviously it's incredibly important. Diversity and inclusion are very key and important factors for this space, our family audience and the library. We want to engage the youngest of learners, and I do that in my day-to-day job. We engage with 0 to 11-year-olds, so the littlest, youngest of learners at the library. And we want to ensure that the families' voices are at the heart of this offer, that their ideas, their needs and opinions have been the inspiration for the story and the overall experience. And the result, we very much hope, is a welcoming, accessible and creative offer, and it is free. I don't know if we've even mentioned that at any slide yet. It's free, and it encourages new and repeat visits from families. Plus, it is open every day of the week for 8 months. And that's the first time at the library that we have had an offer for families like that for 8 months. So we are thrilled. Our incredibly important family co-creation group. We've been working with 11 families over the last year. It's actually a bit more than and that's been made up of 30 brilliant souls with little ones 2 to 9. And we've recruited them very carefully via community partners that we have very strong relationships with. That's Camden Family, and some of you may know them, but I will break down who we've been working with. Camden Family Learning, they're a local partner that we've done lots of engagement with. and the parents were already attending a childcare training course. They were very interested in early years and engagement. They'd been to the library maybe once or twice before, but they were very interested and excited about doing more. And then Edith Neville Family Centre. So this was a group of weekly parents that had never been to the library before, maybe didn't think it was them, and they had a perception of who the library was and who we engaged with. But the whole group were very excited about very much being the body, the voice, the heart of this exhibition. And thankfully, it's really important to us to gain stats and evaluation and feedback and find out if it's actually a beneficial and inspiring project. And thankfully, the families said 100% wanted to come back to the library and engage in another project. They described the library as welcoming, creative, family-friendly. And 100% of the families were from our local borough of Camden, with 73% identifying as families of the global majority. All these, I should say, all these gorgeous photographs are our family co-creation group at numerous different times throughout all the sessions. And also you'll see Mariam pop up at different points as well. It's always incredibly wonderful when you get really positive feedback, and the voices of the families were so important that I wanted to just include some of the quotes. But just to pick some out, the families said that they loved that the kids were coming up with the ideas. They loved the freedom the children had to design and create, that it felt so special. And when they came to see their story explorers for the first time, they were the first people to actually enter and come and do a special walkthrough. They felt it was so special. It was an incredibly meaningful and powerful moment when they all were pointing to their artwork, actually, and pointing to their names. This image here was actually in one of the sort of last co-creation sessions where we showed them like a mock-up of what it would look like. And I had to also share the last quote, which was one of the favorite parts of one of the children was singing with their mommy. The narrative and interpretation. So during the co-creation workshops, we invited families to develop these themed worlds for an imaginary library. And I promise you'll see photos a little bit later on with Mariam about what Story Explorers actually looks like. But I wanted you to very much get a sense of the development. And the families shared their ideas on how they would play, learn, interact, and feel within this library. And the result were 3 wondrous worlds, highlighting that every item tells a story in the collection, and so do you. We have out in space, deep in the jungle, and under the ocean. And the images you see here are just little details of what the actual families created that inspired the final design. And the gallery's key messages very much focus on understanding the library's collection, the breadth and diversity, the age, the fact that we've got things really, really old. And actually we have got the oldest, one of the oldest, but is in the library, actually in the exhibition. And then we have new, exciting, like contemporary zines. The fact that we have things that are from all over the world. So focusing on the geographical origin and also thinking about the potential impact artwork and collections have on us, how we feel in front of those collection items. And in terms of our interpretation approach, looking ahead to a new generation of galleries, we're experimenting with new ways of engaging visitors with collections. And this ambitious family-focused gallery is exploring ways we can connect with and engage the whole family and schools. And this includes a trail that encourages active engagement with collection items and objects, and they're embedded within playful environments. An experience that is visual, sensory, explorative, and created with consideration of different learning and play styles, and activities that encourage group engagement and communication. And all this learning will feed into our future galleries. And it's very much been developed for our audience. We've had lots of fun testing what works best for the families with the families. So we have sounds from our sound and vision collection, as well as bespoke sounds created with the families and with a wonderful sound artist called Robin the Fog. And these have created atmospheric audio. We have hands-on physical interactives, which Mariam will touch on later, and these have been very much prioritized. So we have things like kaleidoscopes and jungle animal masks, all very much inspired by the creations of the families. And then the objects themselves have been displayed in very careful ways, as well as thinking about being low and accessible, but also around the scenography, so within the design. Sensory backpacks developed for families with neurodivergent members. And our text, maybe it's completely a no-brainer, but shorter word count. lots of lovely eye-catching shapes, playful prompts. So thinking very much about graphical ways that we can bring out the collection. And then our adventure trail. This has been offered as a playful adventure, asking families to follow clues and explore the gallery and discover an item seemingly in the wrong place. And you will see later on where it has been placed as hopefully a wonderful surprise. And it's narrated by characters inspired by what the families created themselves. And we hope that it creates an additional layer of interpretation and interaction and provides a more guided visit for families that like and prefer that type of experience. And it's also been carefully developed so that you can join it. And then over to Mariam to talk more about a guide for grown-ups.
So like Nicola said, we wanted to look and explore the text in different ways. So not every single item actually has a label, which means we wanted to create this guide specifically for two reasons. So that it lists every single item that you have in the exhibition, but then also because some of the items that we chose actually touch on climate change or things that are a little bit harder to discuss. And so we wanted to give the grown-ups the information that you can have in order to actually discuss these topics with your children. So now, what does it actually look like? Now, I'm not going to tell you about every single collection item. There is the information on the slides. If you have any questions about any of them, please come and ask me. But if I talk to you about them, then we'll be here for hours, and also you won't come to the British Library. So, and that's the whole point. But this is what the gallery actually looks like. So here you see some of the themes that Nicola was talking about. So you start at the library: space, jungle, and ocean. So let's start at the library. So we wanted to look with the wonders of the British Library. We wanted to look at the different formats that you have at the British Library, because we are a little bit of a misnomer where we fall under library, museum. We have a lot of random things in our collections. So we actually wanted to give that a bit of a highlight and show people that we have different things that you might not see in other libraries. Like little Mohamed is actually listening to a sound recording that we have. So here you have some of the items that we actually put within the exhibition, and you'll probably know this is cool by Mesha Kasare. And I can proudly say that I selected this item for because the children were specifically interested in something where they were talking about stories of overcoming against all odds. And although you feel small and helpless, you can still overcome. And Sususko is a book by the Ghanaian author, Mesha Kasare. And it discusses a boy who has disabilities, but he's able to save his village, and ultimately he gets a new wheelchair. And the other item that I wanted to talk to you about is the shadow puppet, because the shadow puppet is related to active interactive play element that we included, but it's from Java, Indonesia. In terms of the guide, from this section, we actually have this ancient Egyptian stele. And so the ancient Egyptian stele is a funerary stele. So Priestess Imal, who you see right there, she wanted to, this describes how she wanted to be buried, and also a little bit about her life as well. And for this specific item, we wanted to talk about provenance. And I mean, Bouchle has already, or Dr. Bouchle has already touched on the idea of some things have been taken away from Africa, but this is actually one of the items that it discusses the provenance, and it discusses how did it get to the British Library, because children have these same questions. So we wanted to give the adults, again, that information of how do you discuss provenance with your children. And this item was donated to the British Library. But so here you have some of the picture shadow plays. So we wanted to have, so that the children have their own shadow puppets and they can create them themselves in the exhibition. And it's right next to, so if you go there in the exhibition, you actually have the shadow puppet itself. Moving on to space, the children were really, really interested in space, in robots, in aliens, in volcanoes and lava. So we mushed all their ideas up in the out of space section. And in here, oh, no, not there. In that section over there, you actually see the newest items at the time. That was the zines. And yeah, in the Lost in Space, that is our zines that we had. So that's one of the newest items. And yeah, so this section we played on time. So we wanted items that call upon different time periods. And one of the most interesting items, which we also placed in the guide, is the oracle bones. And the oracle bones used to be, until the ancient Egyptian stele replaced it, because the ancient Egyptian stele is now considered the oldest item in the British Library. This changes all the time. So for now, it's considered that, but before that, it was the oracle bones. And now, with the oracle bones, they're important to Chinese writing, which is why we put it in the guide. But at the same time, the way that it would occur, the tradition would occur, is that they would take the bone of an ox in this, the scapula bone of an ox in this instance. They would take a metal rod, put it in fire, put it on the back of the bone, and then hit it. And then on the back, you would get etchings. So this is actually where you see the etchings of the bone itself. And that character actually is the character for Moon. And this is because the question was asked to the oracle, will there be a calamity in the next 10 days? And the answer was like, not really, but there will be something that will happen in the way of the moon. And so ultimately on the bone, it's also recorded that there was a lunar eclipse on the 27th of December, 11,192 BCE. So so this is all the divination in Chinese, ancient Chinese divination, and it's a bit difficult to explain that all in a label that's under 100 words. So we put it in a guide instead. And in this section, it's all about exploratory play. So here you also have the floor is lava, and it's tied to the Faye Godwin photograph. So we really wanted to play with the idea that the lava is spilling out of the volcano, and yeah, you have to, don't step on the lava. And then at the same time, we had the moon. And in the moon, there's actually a clue for the trail that Nicola was talking about. And finally, we had the kaleidoscope, which is a lot of fun because you get to see the stars and the moon. The next section was Deep in the Jungle. And Deep in the Jungle, we wanted to talk about emotions and feelings. So each item was supposed to call upon or inspire a specific emotion. The dung beetle, the splendid-necked dung beetle, which is native to Madagascar, but this one comes from Oxford, actually, the Oxford Natural History Museum. And Levon Bliss wanted to take these small insects and blow them up. So it's meant to inspire awe. And with the elephant manual from Thailand, this is part of our Thai manuscripts. It shows happy and heavenly elephants. Here we have the tiger that's very scared himself, but at the same time instills fear. And this is another item that we placed in the guide because it talks about extinction. And here we have something that calls upon peace and the serenity that we find in nature oftentimes. In this section, we're looking at dramatic and role play. So it's supposed to be a stage. So you have the animal masks that the kids can put on and act a play. But at the same time, as Nicola was suggesting, that we have a lot of sound in the space. So where this child, but he's sitting right next to our frog sound point, and this is where the elephant sound point is. And then we also have a tiger sound point in the same area. And finally, the Under the Ocean section. So in the Under the Ocean, we wanted to look at geography from it. So we wanted to take one item from each part, from each continent. So from Asia, we selected this book about whales from Japan. Oceania, sadly, there was nothing that was visual enough that was written by an author from Oceania. So instead, we got this item from the Great Barrier Reef that was published in London, but still, it's from the Great Barrier Reef of Australia. And this map was written by and published in Antwerp, but it's of Iceland, actually. So we can find it over there. And then for the Americas, we have Canada, and for Africa, we have this Haida wood block of a salmon from the Haida people. And for Africa, we have Veronique Tadjo's book, Mami Wata and the Monster. And this is actually the translation, the bilingual translation in Somali and English. So in this section, we wanted to focus on sensory and creative play. So this whole section over here has a lot of very interesting fabrics, which is very fun for the babies. But we also had a reading area. And the final object is actually Darren Marsh's We Come From Stars, and it relates to each section of the exhibition. And now I have spoiled the trail for you. But you can find it inside the octopus.
Quickly, just to say also, it's really important to us that we get feedback throughout this entire exhibition, and we want to do it creatively and across different learning abilities and learning needs, but also different language. So we ask families to share their feelings, drawings, and ideas. And we are thrilled that, it's been a platform that people have been really excited across the different spaces and their different areas. But also that they've very much taken the fact that they can do it with feedback, with words, feedback with images, and it's very, very visual. But we're relieved that people, I'm trying to go fast now because the 5 minutes, different parts of Story Explorers resonate with different families and different ages. It's wonderful that we have someone that had come that was 93 that drew this gorgeous octopus. But the fact that the moon, the stars, different trails and clues all.
And we also worked with Amber Ogunsunya William at the launch. And this is a lovely, very energetic lady who works with children, and she is a play consultant. And she came to the launch and she gave us these kind words about the exhibition. And at the same time, what you see underneath is multiple family influencers and influencers in general on social media expressing how they felt about the exhibition. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mariam and Nicola. Our second paper of the day is titled Teaching About Transatlantic Slavery by Aishah Olubaji and Naomi Tiley. Aishah Olubaji is currently assistant librarian at Magdalene College, Cambridge, following 3 years as early career librarian at Balliol College, Oxford, during which time she co-curated the Slavery in the Age of Revolution exhibition and helped to coordinate the Associated Teachers Seminar. She took her first master's degree in post-colonial studies, being particularly drawn to narratives of the African diaspora and critical race theory. This background informed her approach to the exhibition and dissertation she completed for her library management MA. Can you decolonize an academic library? Naomi Tiley has worked in academic libraries for 18 years and is currently heading the team at Balliol College Library, University of Oxford. She joined the profession because she experienced the imaginative and informing power of libraries while working summers in Cambridge Public Library during the years of her English literature degree. This developed into a professional interest in using the amazing historic collections in academic libraries to inspire audiences outside of our traditional research users, such as schools, families, and lifelong learners. She co-created the Slavery in the Age of Revolution exhibition at Balliol and led on the Teaching About Transatlantic Slavery project for Balliol. Please welcome Naomi and Aishah.
That fantastic introduction. So I'm Naomi. I'm librarian at Balliol College, and Aishah was going to introduce herself, but she's been introduced. So she'll come and talk to you in a minute. We suddenly realised we hadn't given any context in our presentation about what a college library is, and that's quite a strange thing outside Oxford or Cambridge. So very, very quickly, Oxford and Cambridge University have lots of constituent colleges, and each one has its own library, as well as the copyright libraries in those cities and the faculty libraries. So I come from one of those members only library, but it also has an amazing historic collection, which is open to anyone who wants to come and use it. So Balliol College tries to put on 2 major exhibitions a year using the historic collections in its library and archives. Some of those exhibitions showcase individual collections, particularly new ones, whereas others are thematic explorations of our collections. And the one we're going to talk to you about is one of the latter. So our 2021 exhibition, Slavery in the Age of Revolution, was prompted by a 2019 visit from one of our alumni and honorary fellow now, Oliver Sinclair Franklin. And he came to see us, and he enthused about the research of one of our fellows, Sudhir Hazari Singh, on Toussaint Louverture and the Haitian Revolution. And he also talked to us about his own collecting interests in Black history. So we showed him some things for the collection, and he then, having seen those, challenged us to do an exhibition on transatlantic slavery. And we accepted his challenge, although we thought it might be quite challenging at the time. And this whole topic became much more pressing for the college, the wider college, as it commissioned research into the proceeds of slavery in its endowment, which was published in 2021 at the same time as the exhibition. And the exhibition, you can see here a picture of Sudhir's book. And on the next slide, I'm going to show you a picture of a 1835 pamphlet depicting Toussaint Louverture, which was a loan and then later a gift from Oliver's own collection. And these 2 documents centered our exhibition on research around the age of revolutions, especially the Haitian Revolution, and gave us our geographical and temporal focus on the Atlantic world of the 18th and 19th, late 18th and early 19th centuries, particularly the Caribbean. We also, because of the work the college was doing into its endowment, we also looked at evidence of attitudes to and involvement in transatlantic slavery in Balliol itself to root it right back to Balliol College. And the exhibition then became the basis of and inspired a 3-year professional development programme teaching about transatlantic slavery for educators from the UK and the US, partnering with the Museum of the American Revolution in Philadelphia. So I'm just going to give you an overview of what we hope to talk to you about. We're going to start by introducing you to the exhibition through a short clip from a film by Manuel Ecure, who was one of the apprentice filmmakers on the film project that was associated with the exhibition. And he's filmed colleagues, other young filmmakers, researchers, and artists who worked on the artwork and film projects around the exhibition. Reacting to the exhibition, I think that'll give you a really good idea of what it was like. Then we're going to discuss some of the strengths and also the challenges of the project. So one of the main strengths was that we collaborated so hugely and with so many different people, and I'm just going to tell you a bit about that. But also we met challenges, particularly responding to the gaps and the biases in the material that we had to work with. And we're also going to talk about the aims of the project and our approaches to them. So now I invite you to listen to Alita and Tamaya, Jonathan and Chloe talk about their experience of the exhibition.
My name is Tamaya Jones.
Elisha Schroeder.
Jonathan Bokala-Truna.
Sadness and regret that I didn't know more about this before, that I hadn't learned about it in school. But I also felt very grateful that I was able to be on this journey and to learn, really.
A little curiosity, definitely, but also just a little bit of anger and just sadness, because you know it's there, but like the more you learn about it, the more explicit it is in your brain.
I think the main emotion would be shock, because it's kind of, you're like hidden from it. You read out the book, it's very black and white, like it happened, it ended, but like this, you get to see like so many more of the details. So I'd say shock personally.
The paper art is what struck me. I'm a big fan of fine arts and everything, and I don't know, the way of depicting this horrific thing, which is a transatlantic slavery, in this way, without traumatizing you like most media does. I think that really stuck out to me. There is sort of a threshold we must tread without, re-traumatizing people who have connection to the past. And I think this exhibition succeeded in that.
I think the thing that has most stood out to me from this exhibition has been how embedded the remnants of slavery are in our society today. It's crazy to kind of think about how slavery still impacts society today.
Definitely the art. The way that it was so fluid and lifelike, and it's a good way of connecting with it. Instead of only reading from like paper, you can visualize it.
I didn't know the scale of the Atlantic slave trade before this exhibition. I didn't know how brutal it was. I knew it was brutal, but delving into the exhibition and reading about it, you learn how disgustingly horrible it was.
I know who Toussaint was, in a sense of, he was a figure of the Black community and, the Haitian slave revolution, but I didn't know so much in detail. Yeah, I learned so much about it, about the Benin Kingdom, about abolitionist movements and people that were involved with it.
Collaboration was central to every part of this project, with layers of contributions from a range of people. In addition to the exhibition, we embarked on a joint seminar series with the Museum of the American Revolution and gained valuable contributions from their team. Seminars were supported by a documentary film made with an external production company, and the filming process was pivotal to the development of the exhibition and led to the creation of the paper art. Originally just intended for the film, the art became a key part of the physical exhibition and the catalogue. We were also fortunate to have several Balliol students enthusiastically involved who offered their voices to the project, both in terms of sharing their opinions and appearing in the film, in the choir, in an interview, and as a narrator. We were also able to hire 5 young professionals to work on the film, some of whom you've just seen, thanks to a donation from an alumnus. Perspectives and insights of the young professionals and students enriched the work we produced, from their research skills to their artistic contributions, and sharing what this history and project meant to them, captured in the word art piece that fills the screen. Once we'd identified some key themes and materials in our collections, we started to think about the narrative of the exhibition. Supported by discussion with our collaborators, particularly Marisa Fuentes, whose work seeks to elaborate on the negative space of historical records. I have a short clip from the documentary film showcasing the paper art, commentary from Sudhir Hazari Singh, and Marisa explaining her methodology in her own words.
To fully understand the complexities of the transatlantic slave trade, it's vital to look at the politics and economics of Central and West Africa during a time known by Europeans as the late Middle Ages. The common Western narrative, which is reflected in Western teaching of the subject, is that Africa was uncivilized and primitive during this period, which is not the case. Visiting Balliol fellow Marisa Fuentes has carried out extensive research on this period in history.
The region of West Africa had experienced massive, complex kingdoms. There were complex political relationships and economies, both based on trade and currency. I think that the notion that there was not civilization comes from the archive written by Europeans.
Many of these kingdoms were fabulously wealthy, and there were long traditions and mythologies about these kingdoms. And it was this heritage that was progressively worn down by the imposition of Western colonialism.
The whole story that we have come to know has been drawn from European records. If that narrative is drawn from European records only, then the perspective of what happened during the slave trade, the scale of the slave trade, the diminishing of the horrors of the slave trade are all drawn from those records. They're what all historians use. And historians tend to think that that's the truth, rather than consider that those records are come with an incredible amount of bias. All of that erases Africans' experience and the violence and horror and terror that they experience. What I try to do is shift the gaze from those records to the actual people. How might we think about their experience on board the ship? How might we think about their experience when they land in a place? What might they see or hear or smell? So you take that record and you turn it around. I like to think about it as elaborating on the negative space of the record. If someone is describing a scene of a person being whipped, for example, that person being whipped is also looking out at the scene. So you can sort of write from their perspective with the same document, what they would have witnessed, what they would have felt, what they would have seen.
Drawing strongly on the influence of Marisa and our other collaborators, we aim to curate an exhibition that foregrounded the experiences of the enslaved, focusing on their resistance and abolitionist action, and including their voices to challenge the bias and power of the archive. We also wanted to ensure awareness of the lasting impact of transatlantic slavery on the way we live and think today. One of the ways we elaborated on the negative space, as you can see on this slide, was to incorporate modern artwork. The art pieces were created to depict scenes inspired by first-person narratives of enslaved people, or to repopulate the empty spaces in contemporary records. This particular scene was inspired by Olaudah Equiano's description of him and his sister being taken away from him. Other ways we did this were to start each section with quotes from those first-hand accounts, seen at the top here. We also ended captions with questions to encourage visitors to critically engage with artifacts, rather than just accept them as unbiased and complete, as on the bottom left. We included a case study of the Beckford family, several of whom attended Balliol, gave money to Balliol, and who were a prominent planter and political family in Jamaica and England. Here we had to avoid the easy route of restating information about these well-remembered figures and consequently overlooking the individuals who have been erased from history. We had to maintain a balance of addressing their gross power in the impact it had on people without perpetuating that power by centering them in the narrative. So we turned the focus on the people they exploited by tracing the lives of the people whose labor built that power. But records are scant, so we depend on things like plantation holdings that recognize birth and death as changes in stock levels, which is why it becomes necessary to elaborate on the negative space, as Marisa says, fill the gaps in biased historical records. And entirely led by the content and tone of our collections would have resulted in a skewed reflection of history. So while other exhibitions may present a chance to explore and highlight the collections for their own sake, it was important to keep in mind that the goal of this exhibition was to use the collections as a lens through which to view this particular history. For us, it was important to begin the exhibition narrative in Africa, but we had limited material on or from Africa in this period. In our first case, Encounters, we featured this early 16th century book of voyage accounts, showing a very skewed map of Africa, which centers Iberian trade in the places it names. A map like this allows us to ask the viewer about perspective, to encourage them to question the accuracy and intention of historical record, but it doesn't ground us in the tangible history of Africa as we wanted. One way we addressed this was to create relationships between materials. In this case, a manuscript decorated with gold and a set of gold weights and scales. The manuscript comes from Balliol's own collections, while the weights and scales were loaned from a private collection. But we cannot say for certain where the manuscript's gold originates. Framing this object within the exhibition's wider context, alongside the tools of African gold trade, allowed us to build a cohesive narrative which acknowledged this, from the start the use of African resources for European production. We also used original artwork here, depicting the Benin Kingdom as one example of a contemporary West African society on the left. And we also created a trail with the nearby Pitt Rivers Museum of Anthropology and Archaeology, highlighting objects from Western Africa from the 16th to 19th centuries, demonstrating traditions, crafts, and ideas that help to acknowledge the people, places, and practices affected by colonialism and transatlantic slavery. We also incorporated timelines in the catalogue and at the end of the exhibition, which spanned from 1415 with the establishment of Portuguese trading posts in Africa to 2021, the year of the exhibition. The primary intention of the timelines was to fill some of the gaps in the exhibition's narrative, particularly addressing the colonial exploitation expansion that continued after abolition, acknowledging that abolition was not the end of the violence of transatlantic slavery, and recognizing the modern reverberations of this history up to the present day. We featured two sections of the timelines here. 1807 to 1838 shows what happened after the slave trade was abolished in the British Empire. More rebellions until the abolition of slavery, then mandatory apprenticeship, then the Indian indenture system, further emphasizing initially the role of enslaved people in their own emancipation, as well as continuing systems of exploitation and extraction. Then we have the 21st century, where amongst accomplishments and breakthroughs, we highlighted the Windrush scandal, extrajudicial murders and the ensuing Black Lives Matter movement, and the government's publication of the Race and Ethnic Disparities Report, in which they denied systemic racism in the UK. While only a small part of the exhibition, its impact was clear, with several visitors commenting that they were unaware of even some of the most recent events. So it helped us present a fuller history than we could with the collections alone.
Tell you a little bit about the the Educators Project. So starting in 2021 and until 2023, and working with the Museum of the American Revolution in Philadelphia, we offered a 3-part professional development program to educators, and mostly secondary schools, but we also had museums educators, primary school educators, special school educators, and they were from the UK and the US. With the goal of developing their knowledge and their teaching of the transatlantic slavery. And these are the kind of fuller aims of the project. And these were based on pre-course surveys with the participants to find out what areas they felt they needed more help with around this teaching. So we started in 2021 with an online course with 19 educators. We had 4 afternoons of online seminars with a range of presenters in each. Then in summer 2022, we took those participants to Philadelphia for a fully funded 5-day conference at the museum. And then the next summer, we brought those participants together with new participants so they could learn from the initial cohort. So then we had 38 participants at Balliol for 5 days, and again, fully funded. We had a variety of sessions that responded to the themes of the exhibition and the film, and the things that the teachers said that they needed more help with. So things like talks from academics, performances from musicians and from dramatists, and visits to historic locations. And you'll see a few on the slides. 2 minutes left, so I'm going to go quick. But I think the thing that I want to draw out that the teachers most thought was important was actually being together to share different pedagogical approaches, tools and tips, and to have this expanded network of colleagues to share and learn from. I'm going to skip a little bit, but I want to say about the outcomes. So we chose participants who had ways of sharing the knowledge wider, as well as changing their own schemes of work, which they did. They did things like presenting at the US Embassy Teach Meet Historical Association conference. And actually this May, one of the teachers published a book, a school textbook about how transatlantic slavery manifested in Liverpool, his home city, and it has a guest chapter by one of the other teachers on the course. So it had some very tangible outcomes. Some of the feedback, I'm going to skip over this quickly, but I just want to draw attention to the fact that a lot of the teachers said that they liked about the course that they got a really deep dive into the material. Because I want to get onto this, because one of the areas that teachers wanted most help with was teaching about West African history in this context, or to give context to this subject. And we integrated this in lots of different ways through musicians, academics working in West African history, and in object handling at the Pitt Rivers Museum. And I think these different ways of approaching the subject suggested various ways to teach the subject as well. And you can see the feedback. This led to a lot more teaching of African history in the teacher's curriculum, but also the last quote, a wish to know more about the subject. I'm out of time. I'm going to skip over this, but this is the art visiting a school and students making their own soundscapes and lighting with it. And I'm going to hand over to Aishah because I think this last bit's important.
Just to summarize, so we had legacy in mind throughout the project. And so Nick, the paper artist, made a blank book to serve as an interactive art piece to capture new stories and legacies of this history, inviting contributions from visitors. That's the book on screen. And then at the top, we've got a contribution that we wanted to highlight. So you can read that in your own time of the last 20 seconds that we have. And thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. Our final paper for this panel is presented by Abdul Mohamed and Robin Whitburn. Their paper is entitled Justice to History, Developing Curricula and Pedagogies for Teaching African History. Abdul Mohamed is a doctoral research fellow at University College London, working with a project on the teaching of empire, migration, and belonging. He has 17 years experience working in schools in London and overseas. Robin Whitburn is a lecturer in history education at University College London, teaching on the secondary PGCE course in history and working on the EMB project. He has over 30 years experience in London comprehensive schools in a range of roles. Thank you.
Thank you for that introduction. Good afternoon. Oh, so good morning. Good morning, everyone. Oh, no, it's just gone. All right. Thank you for that introduction. My name is Abdul. This is Robin. We are both teachers by trade. And a lot of the work that has engaged us over the last, well, since we started working together, last 13 years or so, has been how to teach about African history better in our context, which is English secondary schools. And for this talk today, we're just going to be giving you a bit of an overview. We don't have enough time to go into the details of the work that we've done, but we can give you a snapshot of what motivated us, what changes we've observed, and where we see the roads going in terms of progressive development in this
area. As Abdul said, we've been working together for about 13 years or so now. And we started pretty much looking at the diaspora experience of African people in Britain. In fact, it was British Somali history that actually brought us together at the start.
Yeah. So we were asked to do a sort of Black History Month presentation at some building. And I decided to do something that I would like to have been taught about when I was in school, which was the history of the peoples that I sort of came from. And so I just did a 20-minute session on the migration stories of Somali people in Britain, really from 1879 to the present day. And then that developed into a 6-lesson inquiry looking at one's community in Butetown in Cardiff, sailors predominantly, who then were gradually not replaced necessarily, but overshadowed in number by refugees who started to arrive in the 1990s, and the different outlooks that they had on the future and interest for their life in Wales. So the question we had for that was, when did Somali migrants decide to unpack their suitcase in Wales?
So my own kind of experience of African history is a bit different. I wasn't actually at school when this film was made, but not long after. This is actually a 1958 program. You can still watch this on BBC iPlayer. It's Sir Mortimer Wheeler, a kind of an English archaeologist. He's talking about Great Zimbabwe at a time when people were first beginning to wonder about this this monument, this terrific architectural city in southern Africa. But this was his. This was just the opening of the program.
Africa. Big game and endless bush. Every schoolboy knows his Africa, or thinks he does. A baked brown wilderness. And then, suddenly round a corner is one of the strangest ruins in the world. Zimbabwe.
And this idea that schoolboy, every school child knows it's Africa. And at the time, it was full of misconceptions that Africa was a uniform thing. Africa was undeveloped. Africa was unusual. So even when it had a tremendous archaeological find, somehow this was mysterious. And we wondered really, well, okay, it's over 60 years old now, but can you still find those ideas in the 21st century? And I think, sadly, we know that it is possible to find all of those things in the 21st century. So what really concerned us 12, 13 years ago, still concerns us, is what is the school students' perception of Africa? My own kind of a bit of my own experience, and that I have a godson who's now in his early 20s, but his heritage is Nigerian. And when he was about 5 years old, his mum had to actually take him to Nigeria because he was absolutely convinced that people in Nigeria lived in mud huts. No matter what he was told or pictures he was shown, somehow he'd absorbed this understanding of Africa just from the playground. He went to a very nice primary school where they didn't teach that. He had parents who didn't teach him, godparents who didn't teach him that, but he somehow gleaned this from society. So it's there. In 2020, the world kind of experienced a bit of a turning point in some way with respect to these things.
Yes. So the 2020 moment had an impact in education. A lot of the problems that people observed, the solution to those problems was in education. And we were asked by the Royal African Society to conduct some research just to find out how Africa is being taught, African society, African history, African is being taught in schools, speaking to educators and community individuals.
And in fact, it was the Royal Africa Society, but the prime mover was actually the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Africa. Parliament actually has an incredible number of these groups that are concerned about different parts of the world. One of the larger than the Africa group is the group on the Norfolk Island in the Pacific, goodness knows why. But there is a group of MPs and lords who are actually interested in Africa and education about Africa in school.
And I think their interests predated the 20.
Yeah,
but
true.
It was propelled, and that energy and that desire to get something out quickly, to meet that interest was in that.
And we found that teachers were reporting that young people were not aware of African history. They reported themselves not being aware and not feeling that they were trained enough or had enough experience and education in it. They wanted to. There was a will to do that. They also reported on some restrictions that gatekeepers place, like exam boards and governments. There are restrictions on what's available for people to do. One of the worst and ridiculous ones was that the government in the early 2010s decided that when English teachers are teaching novels, at GCSE for 16-year-olds. They have to teach novels written by people born in the British Isles. So Zadie Smith, an author of colour who's been born in England and grew up here, yep, her novel can be studied. But Chimamanda Adichie, wonderful work, Purple Hibiscus, which was used in many schools. You can't use that because she was born in Nigeria. So kind of things like that need to change. And we've made some recommendations in our report. I have got a couple of copies because I realized one thing that I don't think we didn't do, was really tap into libraries and archives very much and ask them to participate in that actual report, which I regret. But if you'd like a copy of it, we can give it to Jenny at the end. So really, what have we done about it? What have we done about all this? That's what the field is like. It's this report in 21-22 still says some of the things that Morton Mawila is talking about in the mid-1950s. So what are we trying to achieve? We call ourselves Justice to History. It's quite grand and maybe a little bit arrogant, but we do really believe that it's an important thing. And we spent quite a lot of time thinking about what do we mean by that justice. One is restorative justice. It is so long past the time when we should be ignorant of what is happening on this amazing continent in the world, Africa. And we should be restoring the histories that have been ripped out of the history books, ripped out of knowledge. The whole thing that Dr. Boothlet talking about, knowledge of Africa, how important is to restore that. It's not that this has developed since Europe made contact. It's been there ever since, and we should be restoring that. And so much of that way in which African knowledge has been treated, part of the construction of race and racism that's happened over the last 4 or 5 centuries in the Western world. And real true knowledge of Africa is one part of actually countering that racism.
And finally, on curriculum balance. So the existing work on Black history does focus on transatlantic slavery and US civil rights, and that's a hangover from the first national curriculum, where, because of lobbying, transatlantic slavery was included, rightly so. But the need to teach about Africa before the transatlantic slavery took off was only given as sort of guidance. It was not statutory guidance, and so a lot of people just began with teaching the slave trade, and that created a lot of these negative, I think, it contributed certainly the negative assumptions that people had about African societies in the school system, certainly in the materials that were used. So about rebalancing that. So in actually a year before the 2020, so 2018 or 2019, we wanted to just get the views of a group of really eager teachers, and we asked them, well, what is it that you want to see in terms of African history? What would be an ideal sort of curriculum intervention? So we had to ask them first what they did. We looked at their curricula. We spoke to them about the assessments they had. We looked at where they had space to add new inquiries. And in that sort of exercise, we got a sense of sort of 3 broad approaches for what people taught about Africa and how they taught about it, I should say. The one was the empires approach, and we've had a few sort of instances of how that could manifest today. But broadly speaking, we teach about European empires, we teach about Britain as a monarchy. We're going to look at Africa in the same way. We're going to look at these monarchies, particularly when teaching about figures like Mansa Musa. So these are sort of familiar characters, a medieval monarch, contemporary of other figures that they're teaching, and they're not consciously doing it in that way, but it is a way of them keeping a sense of familiarity whilst doing something different. The other is the less common, but the thematic approach, where you look at an issue across time, religion, for instance, resistance. And then finally, slightly more common than number 2, but not as common as 1, was what we just call the injustices approach, where you essentially look at the story of Africa through this particular theme of injustice, violence, slavery, whatever it is. In the two examples here, King Leopold of Belgium, and the transatlantic slave trade, or the violence associated with maintaining that system. So those are the two common examples of injustices approaches that are used. And as a theme, it allows teachers to cover lots of incidents and tie them together through that lens. And you can imagine what impact it has if that's the only experience young people get of learning about Africa, as being just the victims of violence and injustice.
And so what we've done is come up with, we call them inquiries. That's kind of like sequences of about 6 or 7 lessons. And we've come up with a number of inquiries across the last kind of 13 years, which blend those kind of approaches. Sometimes it's kingdoms with some injustice, sometimes it's thematic. We have, I think one of the earliest ones we did was on the Ashanti Empire in modern day Ghana. And it was, why does no one sit on the golden stool of the Ashanti people? The whole thing about that. We don't have time to go into all of these. Please ask us later, and we're glad to chat about it. We also did, this was one of the kind of ones that really responded to what teachers asked for, isn't it? They asked us to do an initial inquiry for like year 7, that sort of 11-year-olds starting off in school. They always do something like, what is history? And they might have a dustbin and look for things in a dustbin as that's clues, or do a detective story, you know, find out the part. And they said teachers said to us, can't you do one that is about Africa? You do a what is history about Africa? And so...
And this was a way, so a common reply that we would get from teachers when we told them that they could, you know, include African narratives in their curriculum, was we don't have the time. We can't fit it in. It's already too crammed. What do we take out? Like, okay, you've got this sort of completely ahistorical sort of beginning to year 7. You can replace that with something that is rooted in context and it, you know, does the same sort of job, but just more sort of substantively history focused. And
take out the bins and put in African history. What some schools are doing. And we'll show you a little bit more of that in a second. This was one that kind of wrestled with this whole problem of what's happened to African history. So we were challenging the idea that Africa was a dark continent. How dark was the story of Africa before 1900? I think that's actually the first one we did.
Yeah, and we tried to do a lot there. So there was a recognition that they assumed that, or they had some negative views of African history. So we had to address that in some way through the question, but not assuming it on the students explicitly by placing it on the people who created these myths. So we introduced Hegel and other individuals, and then we introduce African scholars who then spend their lives refuting the ideas.
Soon after that, we actually did one on Timbuktu and actually looked at the whole history of the manuscripts in Timbuktu and the background to the city, how a city-state developed, and so on. And we also had, we both taught actually on the continent of Africa, in South Africa, in a school in Pietermaritzburg. And we were teaching people of Zulu heritage and white British heritage and white Afrikaner heritage and Sotho heritage, a very diverse school. And they asked us to teach about apartheid. So we chose to actually do it through the kind of the thoughts and thinking of this pastor in the Dutch Reformed Church who actually leaves the church because of Sharpeville, because of the Sharpeville massacre. And so why did Beyers Naudé break rank from his church in 1960? So that's the work that we've done. That was this was the Hegel thing. Hegel became the kind of, we thought it was fairly safe to make Hegel the kind of the bad person, the person who the class could find repellent almost. And then we actually presented this, we were talking about it at a group like this, and there was actually a Hegel specialist who came out and said, I think you've been a bit hard on Hegel.
We hadn't, but...
We hadn't, I don't think we had. We only had one defender of Hegel. But we do things like, but for the young people, these our 11, 12-year-olds. And there's Hegel's quote, Africa is no historical part of the world, a land enveloped in the black color of night. And then we tell them about the golden rhino, this artifact found in Mapungubwe in the northern parts of South Africa. And then the fact that the government had hidden this for so long, and then now in recent decades it's been revealed. So what would Hegel have done with the golden rhino? That's the kind of question that. So that was that. We'll skip through this and just bring you to the most recent inquiry. So I think it's true to say we're engaged at the moment in planning. We've got 2 weeks to do it. We're talking at a conference in 2 weeks' time about probably the most difficult inquiry that we've yet done on any historical topic. And it's an inquiry about Nigeria. And it's true that students in English schools do learn about Nigeria. They learn about the Kingdom of Benin. Sometimes they might learn about Oyo. They might learn about the Sokoto Caliphate. They learn about imperial connections. So they learn about what the British did in the Niger Delta. We teach about Jar Jar of Opobo. Great story, how the British exploited the area and so on. Don't learn about Nigeria post-1960. What's happened over these decades?
Conception of South Africa.
Yes, South Africa, but
African
generally they don't
society,
think about Africa, let alone Nigeria. Yeah, there's
just independence
in the last 50, 60 years. And we're struggling at the minute to get our thoughts together. We've got two characters. We like to focus on people if we can. And we've got Fela Kuti, and we've got Olusegun Obasanjo. It was interesting, he talked about his presidential library. We've got a little clip of showing him while it was being built. He's got this massive presidential library. And the interesting thing is Obasanjo representing the kind of military rule and so forth in Nigeria, Fela representing radical protest and Afrobeats and Pan-Africanism. And we found that they both came from the same town in Western Nigeria, Abeokuta in Ogun State. Their parents knew each other. And we're building something around the kind of alternatives that these two were offering. One offering military stability, one offering cultural unity. Both of them, and it all ending in this event where Obasanjo brings his military troops to Fela's compound, to his Kalakuta Republic, and actually Obasanjo is in charge of the troops that actually throw Fela's mother out of a first floor window. She dies a year later from the injuries from that. If anybody's got any inspirational ideas they want to offer us for what we do with that history, please.
We've come to the end of our talk. Thank you very much.